Well, fans, the last time that we recorded an episode of Believe in White Sox, the White Sox had just come off a win at the San Francisco Giants. I told myself, I said, I don't think I'm going to record another episode unless the White Sox get a win in the series against the Detroit Tigers. They did not. I said, I think I'll record one if they get a win in the series against the Texas Rangers. They did not. Over the weekend, you had Labor Day weekend. I figured, well, maybe they'll scrap out a win against the New York Mets. They did not. And so finally, to let everybody on Believe in White Sox know that I am still alive and this show is still rolling, we're recording here on Tuesday, September 3rd, with the White Sox on an 11-game losing streak. Welcome to Believe in White Sox. My name is Greg Moraz, your host, as always. Hit like, hit subscribe, download all of the downloads that you can, play this show on repeat. Do everything you can to help boost the metrics of this podcast. But quite frankly, if you're not listening, and you won't hear me if you're not listening, I don't blame you for not listening. Because the title of this episode is There Is No Bottom. How is there no bottom? As the White Sox get set to take on the Baltimore Orioles tonight at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, and by the time this episode airs, or you listen to it, the White Sox may have already played that game. The White Sox are on an 11-game losing streak. Their last win was in San Francisco against the Giants. But there seemingly is no bottom to this team. They, on Sunday against the Mets, lost their 107th game, which set a new franchise single-season record for losses. The previous was 106. I cannot remember what year that the 106 was in. I think it was one of the years in the 80s, but it's not worth looking up at this point in time. The White Sox offense continues to struggle. They're second to last in the big leagues in batting average. Garrett Crochet on his limited innings, 3 to 4 innings is not going to make an impact for the rest of the game when you have to put this tired bullpen out there time and time again. It said a lot in terms of some things happened in the Rangers series that were just weird. I think the Tigers coming in, many could say it's Jason Benetti's revenge coming back to U.S. Cellular Field, Guaranteed Rate Field. I don't know. I'm always going to call it the Cell. And watching his new team sweep the White Sox. So now I know that Benetti was there a little bit earlier in the year, but maybe Jason Benetti is taking some sort of joy in his new team coming into his old ballpark and sweeping the White Sox. Although I don't know how much joy there is at this point in sweeping the White Sox. The fact that they started the game on Tuesday night, Crochet throws 4 pitches and then they call it. I don't understand why they even started the game. To me, that made no sense when you knew that the weather was going to be bad throughout the area for most of the evening. I don't know why they started that game. I think it was the first time since 1913 that a game started and was suspended before any out had been called. I don't know who found that, but whoever found that, props to you because you did a hell of a job trying to compartmentalize the situation. And then when they have the doubleheader the next day, there were, and I didn't look at the actual attendance, but there were, as some people counted it from one photo that a guy took from, I think, the club level on the first base side. That's where it looked like those seats were based on my times in the ballpark. There were probably about 85 people in the stands for the resumption of that game against the Rangers. And then the embarrassing moment when Schuster is on the mound, they're about to start the inning, the ball goes down to second, and Lenyn Sosa is not looking and the ball hits him square in the face. That is the picture that should define the White Sox season in 2024. I had said on our last episode, and I even remember how I signed off, I said, I don't know, or at least I said I hoped that the White Sox would be under 100 losses by the end of the Tigers series. That would have required them splitting with the Tigers. I had said a couple of episodes ago that I thought that there was no chance that they ended up at 105 losses by the time that August came to an end. Well, as play started on September 1st, the White Sox had 106 losses. They were at 106 at the end of August. 107 came on Sunday. 108 came yesterday. And I think a lot of people in the 108 fan section on Twitter are 108ing today because the White Sox are at 108 losses. But the point being is that the 120 loss mark, the modern day record post World War II by the 1962 New York Mets, is well within striking distance. And if you want to do a little bit of Sox math here, and I don't know why anybody would want to actually do any Sox math, the White Sox are 31 and 108. And by my calculations, that's 139 games. So they have left in this season 23 games. They need to go in order to avoid setting that record. The White Sox need to go, as I think about this, because apparently I can't do math in my head. The White Sox need to go 10 and 13. 10 and 13. No, because 13 losses is 121. Because the Mets only played 160 games that year. Their first game of the year was rained out and never made up, and their last game of the year was rained out and never made up, which is something I, by the way, found out a little bit earlier today from my good friend David Coppett. Shout out to you, DK, if you're listening. I don't quite feel like this White Sox team is going to suck it up and say, we are going to have some pride and actually figure out a way to get this thing respectable enough. And at this point, respectable enough is having enough pride to not set Major League Baseball's all-time record for losses in a single season, at least post-World War II. Now, there are some teams from the early 1900s and the late 1890s that are well below that in that regard. But if you want to look at the win percentage right now, the White Sox win percentage at this point is 22.3%. Wait, did I do that math right? I think I did that math right. I don't know why I can't do math properly sometimes. 31 divided by 139. Yeah, they're at 22.3% at this point. And that effectively means that they're in a really good position to set MLB's franchise, or rather MLB's all-time single season losses. You know what I'm trying to say. I had the article pulled up earlier. I gotta figure out what I did with it. I know this is riveting stuff here, folks. All right, there we go. We've got it. In the modern era, the worst win percentage of all time is the 1916 Philadelphia A's, who had a .235 win percentage, 117 losses. The New York Mets have the most losses at 120 in that period, but their win percentage was at .250. The Boston Braves in 1939, .248. They went 38 and 115. The last team to lose that many games, or to lose, the last team to lose over 115 games was the 03 Detroit Tigers, who went 43 and 119. I think the White Sox are in that. They're going to be in that category. They're going to end up at that categorical number. And that's embarrassing. And I don't understand how mathematically this team can figure out a way to lose games that frequently. I mean, some of the numbers that I've seen are just insane. Two stats in my mind pop up in particular. The White Sox are on an 11-game losing streak right now. That's the third longest losing streak in baseball this year, behind only themselves with the 14-gamer and themselves again with the 21-gamer. They're the only team in baseball to have a losing streak of 10 games or more this season, and they've done it 3 different times. Another stat that I saw somebody put out there, I'm going to give Grant Brisbee, I always mess up his name, but the American League Central as a division is 38 games under 500. The entire division is 38 games under 500 for the year. 4 of the 5 teams in the American League Central at this moment have winning records. The division's 38 games under 500, and every team in the division but the White Sox has a winning record. To me, that is the ultimate embarrassment. And here's a stat that I'm going to credit Jesse Rogers of ESPN for when he tweeted this out because I thought it was insane. So Chris Flexen started for the White Sox yesterday in their 13-3 loss at the Orioles. Per ESPN Stats and Info, it's the 20th consecutive game that the White Sox have lost. Or rather, how do I phrase this? It's the 20th straight loss for the White Sox when Chris Flexen has started. It's the most consecutive losses in a row for a team with the same starting pitcher on the mound. So basically, if Chris Flexen is out on the mound, it means you're not winning, whether he gets the loss or not. And, at this point, I'm trying to find things that you can build off of. Now, the White Sox called up Jacob Amaya not that long ago, and Jacob Amaya is somebody I remember covering with the Ogden Raptors. He, a Dodger prospect when he first came out of Oklahoma State. He's not a prospect. He's not a guy that is going to end up being a long-term infield solution. He's a roster filler at this point, which means that they probably don't want to start the service clock of Colson Montgomery. And they probably don't want to start the service clock of Brian Ramos. But at this point, you're seeing moves earlier today where they're calling up Matt Foster, and I forgot that Matt Foster was still in the organization. Him being a big part of the bullpen just a couple of years ago, and then finally DFAing Touki Toussaint, who was horrible yesterday out of the pen against the Orioles. Touki Toussaint, by the way, prime example of a guy that is a former first-round pick, but doesn't live up to his first-round status. Baseball's funny like that. Baseball life is weird in terms of how it frames the careers of certain players. And a guy like Touki Toussaint, who a lot of people thought was a can't-miss prospect, is getting DFA'd by the worst team in baseball 10 years after he was first drafted. Baseball's weird like that. But at some point, when you hear Chris Getz in the offseason say, I don't like our team, and then trade away your best starting pitcher in Dylan Cease, and make no real effort to get better around the margins. You found roster fillers in Nicky Lopez to play in the middle infield. You trade away Aaron Bummer, and the pieces that you've gotten from that Aaron Bummer trade, I mean, you've seen a little bit of Dominic Fletcher. Nicky Lopez has been, what he has been. Mike Soroka was awful. He's not the Mike Soroka of his prime Braves tenure anymore. And I just don't know if there's any other owner in charge, and Chris Getz was given the authority to fire Pedro Grifol and the 3 other coaches that he fired. But the more that I look at it, I cannot absolve Chris Getz from blame for how bad this season has gone, because the White Sox went 61 and 101 last year. And the whole reason why Jerry Reinsdorf promoted him instead of going from the outside is because he believed, with Getz's knowledge of the farm system, him being the former director of player development, that this team would get better quicker with somebody like him that was already familiar with the organization. Now, we all know that Jerry Reinsdorf loves to hire insularly, and that's why you have so many guys that are members of the family that end up getting hired. Not like direct members of the Reinsdorf family, but members of the White Sox community family. And it says something at this point that all you got back for your major league ready talent at the trade deadline was two A ball prospects, one of them that's hurt, and a guy in Miguel Vargas who is proving at the big league level that he may not be the type of big league player that his prospect status reflected. And I don't think Chris Getz is going to lose his job, but I think Chris Getz at the end of the year needs to go to the podium in the press room at Guaranteed Rate Field and have some answers for why this season went as poorly as it did. So before we end up saying goodbye here today, and I wanted to make sure that we made it a 2 segment show because of the fact that, well, we want to make sure that we pay off some of the sponsors as well that are presenting our show here on the Believe Network. Wanted to go through a couple of injury updates with the White Sox, and specifically with Drew Thorpe, who is going to undergo season-ending surgery on September 7th, right here in San Francisco, actually. And Thorpe was really good to start the year, but he ends up with a 3-3 record and a 5.48 ERA. He ended up giving up 7 or 8 runs in the first inning in his start against the Mariners back in July, and that was kind of the beginning of the end for him. I think that Drew Thorpe being one of the big pieces of the trade with the Padres is going to be a part of this rotation next year, so you want to make sure that he is healthy and available. The more that I see from Jonathan Cannon, the more I feel like he's going to be a mainstay in next year's rotation as well. So to have Thorpe and Cannon, I think is going to be a big bonus to the White Sox, at least in trying to feel like they're a competitive rotation moving forward. I don't know necessarily what to think about what they're going to do with Garrett Crochet in the offseason, but if Garrett Crochet ends up coming back and is the opening day starter in 2025, then maybe there's a chance of an extension. Who knows? Zach DeLoach got called up, and DeLoach is one of those other guys. We had made mention of Jake Bamaya, but Zach DeLoach ended up getting called up from AAA Charlotte, sitting 287 with 22 doubles, 6 homers, and 54 runs batted in 97 games with Charlotte. Since July 1, he's hitting 322 with a 409 on base and a 507 slugging percentage, 29 runs batted in that span. But in his first stints with the White Sox this season, he was just 3 for 22 at the plate. So maybe Zach DeLoach, if he has a good September, is going to prove to be something. But again, I think with the White Sox at this point, they're so bad that the guys that you're going to see getting called up in September are going to be guys on the 40-man roster that are not clearly part of the organization's plans moving forward. Now, what is the 40-man roster at this point for the White Sox? Because you don't want to start service clocks earlier than you have to. So, at least in terms of position players, there are no other catchers on the 40-man roster. And nope, wait, that's the active roster. My apologies. So, Kai Bush is on the 40-man roster, but he's back in the minors, and I think he needs to work on his command, but you might see him come up to make a couple of starts toward the end of September. I think that once the AAA season is over, the White Sox will definitely try to work him in if they feel like it is appropriate to do so. Jake Eater is part of the 40-man roster. Maybe he's somebody that gets called up. Same with Sammy Peralta. Got a lot of guys in the 40-man that are currently on the injured list. Braden Shoemake, who was on the opening day roster, maybe he comes up as a filler at some point. Brian Ramos has yet to make his big league debut. Colson Montgomery, it should be noted, is not on the 40-man roster, so I don't think the White Sox are going to put him on the 40-man roster until possibly next year. In fact, they have to do it next year because Colson Montgomery is a now I have to remember. So he was drafted in 2021, which means that as a high school pick, he'd have to be. I think he's Rule 5 eligible this upcoming off season. I have to go back and review the rules of the Rule 5 draft, but I believe that he is somebody that, if he's not on the 40 man, could end up being Rule 5. Oscar Colas is still in the minor leagues on the 40 man roster. So there's a strong potential that he ends up getting called back up at some point. And I'd love to actually see him play on a regular basis. But again, I don't know what to think of where this organization's going. I don't know where they're going. I don't have any sort of feelings in terms of what positive signs you're going to see moving forward. I thought that with the managerial change that you would have something better than what you have right now. But to me, it's not worth bringing up some of these prospects to start their service clocks early. It's just not. But at the same time, maybe it is worth starting the service clock early, the last arbitration year be damned, in order to see what some of these guys are actually made of at the big league level. And we'll see at a certain point in time, but there's a lot of guys that are playing right now that the thing for them is that they're not a part of a White Sox competitive future. And at this point, and this is, I know that I've made that point earlier, but at this point, they're not playing well enough to have any trade value. Especially somebody like an Andrew Benintendi with his contract. He's not going to have much of a trade value. And at this point, I might even just consider getting rid of Luis Robert for whatever value you might be able to get for him. But Chris Getz has to prove that he can get proper value for somebody before actually trading him. And I think we'll find out a lot about Chris Getz's opponent prospect evaluation this upcoming offseason, because what he's given us at this point is not acceptable of a major league general manager that feasibly knows how to evaluate other organizations' prospects. So that's it. That's all here on this edition of Believe in White Sox. Thank you again for joining us. Don't know when you'll hear from us again, but hopefully the current losing streak will come to an end and the White Sox can somehow rise their way out of the bottom.